And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 23rd episode of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. We are recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Tuesday evening, January 7th, 2020, where I am your host, Noah Freeman. Yes, I am back. As you can tell, as I already messed up the opening with is the 123rd, and I only remember that because I was prepping the podcast. But on the docket for tonight, we are going to start, on the docket for tonight, it's not going to be the most happy of podcasts due to, obviously, recent circumstances in both the two major sports for Indiana, but we're kind of hoping that this can be a venting session, and sometimes venting sessions can be almost more cleansing than even more happy podcasts. So that's what we're going for tonight. Venting, getting it all out of the way, because we've had a few days to stew in everything, and then hopefully tomorrow we can start just to wash our hands clean with everything. But we'll start with a Gator Bowl recap and kind of how does that affect the outlook on the season overall. So we will discuss if that put a damper on the season overall, or if we still see this season as a wild success. Then we'll go into some basketball, of course. We'll talk a little bit about the ugly loss at Maryland. We don't want to dwell on that too long, but we'll kind of move into just a general basketball discussion and how Indiana can fix how they're currently playing as they take on Northwestern and Ohio State this week. But here with me tonight, after a bunch of concerts and traveling and everything, all the three of us, the whole gang is back together. The holidays are over. Podcast times are back to normal. There's no more Tuesday basketball games to where we can just be completely normal from here on out. Nathan and Matt, how are we doing after this long and hopefully nice holiday breaks for you guys? I'll kick it off with Nathan, who has not gotten away from the schoolwork recently, despite the holiday breaks.
No, it's look, you got to do what you got to do, but no, a little turbulence last week in the Indiana football and basketball programs, to
say the least.
So in football, it's an interesting offseason coming up, obviously with Kalen DeBoer out of the picture now. Basketball, there's a long way to go, and things could get all right, or things could continue to slump like they have been over the last couple of weeks.
How are you doing this evening, Matt, after I finally got to see you in person, not through a screen this past weekend for the first time in a very long time, I think.
I know. It's wonderful to meet you in Jacksonville and get to go to the game. That was a lot of fun. Shout out to Rob and Indiana HQ for letting that happen. That was a wonderful opportunity and a lot of fun. It was a great experience. We'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, it was nice seeing you and your fiance, Jenna, in Jacksonville. So That was a lot of fun. And I still have her bag. It's sitting right here.
Yeah,
we got toiletry bags for free from the Tax Slayer Bowl. It's got a nice Tax Slayer logo on it. So I guess that's going to be
of all the things they give us, they felt the media would be best given with toiletry bags with Tax Slayer Bowl written on top of it.
Right. I mean, I was in need of a new toiletry bag. I actually talked about it a week ago with my mom. So now I have it.
There you go.
But I think you know what you guys are going to get for your wedding gift now. So
apparently.
There you go.
A toothbrush.
Yeah. So speaking of Jacksonville, Matt and I went down there, and we had a couple other people as well that were covering the game. We had 4 people covering the game, actually, which was really nice. We all got to kind of sit back and relax and still do a little bit. It wasn't one person running around doing everything, which a lot of us have experienced before. So it was nice to kind of be there. Both Matt and I were in the press box. We had my fiance and then Colin, one of our photographers / videographers, both on the field taking pictures and videos. Yes. Hi, Colin. So we had Matt and I in the press box doing some stuff with all the media and people down on the field. And I think if Nathan were to ask both Matt and I what the game experience was, I don't think we could give you a very accurate statement on how the game experience was, because the press box was real quiet. We couldn't hear very much of anything when all the Rocky Top stuff was being sung. We could only hear the high climaxes, and when the marching band was facing the other way, we couldn't hear the marching band. And when you can't hear the 200+ person marching band facing the Indiana stands, it's pretty quiet in there. And when I went down onto the field, they didn't let press box people down onto the field until about 5 minutes left into the game. And of course, it's all my fault, because I was in the press box up until 5 minutes left in the game, and of course that's where everything everything fell apart. So I'll take full responsibility for all that happened. But when I went onto the field, it was a completely different experience. But all in all, despite the events that happened, I don't think it hit me as much just because the spectacle that Jacksonville was for both Matt and I getting in the press box was, I don't think the loss hit me as hard. Do you feel different, Matt?
I mean, I don't know how much the city of Jacksonville paid you to call it a spectacle, but
the Gator Bowl, not Jacksonville,
okay.
the city.
I was about to say Jacksonville's interesting.
No,
but no, the Gator Bowl was awesome.
IU being in a big bowl game against a traditional powerhouse program with nice, I mean nice as in lots of rowdy fans that to fill the stadium, and it wasn't an empty stadium for most of the bowl games that Indiana typically might see.
Yeah, my parents said the Tennessee fans are great winners. My parents and my girlfriend were in the crowd, and I accidentally bought the tickets on StubHub way too quickly.
Yeah, you
did. And I got them, and they were in a sea of orange. Like literally, the entire Tennessee designated sideline was entirely orange, with like little dots of red. And my parents were probably one of the 3 dots of red. Anyways, but it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. They loved it. Jacksonville and the Gator Bowl put on a great event. It was wonderful. I didn't know I liked Hawaiian food. They fed us Hawaiian food in the press box. That was nice. The game was great. It was hard for me as a person who likes to talk with my hands, as you can see and feel, in the moment during the game. It was hard for me to sit in the press box and go through that game and not have some sort of physical or emotional reaction. If you guys were following the Hoosier Sound on Twitter, you would have seen my reactions because all my emotions went into Twitter, because you can't yell, you can't root, because you're a member of the press corps, so you're supposed to be impartial. It was really tough to do. I know it sounds like first world problems right now, but I'm serious. It was so hard. But like it was like looking back on it now, it was a wonderful game. It was a lot of fun. And if you had told me that before the season, that's how the season was going to end, was to a streaking Tennessee team, like coming and winning 5 of their last 5 games, going in to win 6 games in a row to end the season, in Jacksonville at a de facto Tennessee home game, that we would take them down to the wire like that, and we would lose the game, and that they would beat us. Like I would have taken that in a heartbeat and have a shot at 9 wins. So this season was wonderful, and we're so excited for next season. And we'll talk a little bit more about specifics of the game, but I'm sure I speak for the rest of us at Indiana HQ when I say it was a blessing to cover this football team compared to the last couple of years for football. So, and we're really excited for next season.
Of course. So Matt and I have talked a lot about the game afterwards, and we kind of know our opinions. And we were at the game, but Nathan, we want to try and get your opinion as a spectator on TV. Of course, a lot of the more negative statistics. This is now Indiana's on a 5 bowl game losing streak. They haven't won a bowl game since 1991. They've lost the last. This statistic kind of hurts and puts it in reality how close they've been. The last 3 bowl games Indiana has been since 2014. They've lost all 3 games by a combined 6 points. They lost to Duke, obviously on a field goal, lost by 3, then they lost to Utah by 2, and then they lost to Tennessee by 1. So the last 3 games combined 6 points. And of course, you've heard the stat that FBS teams this season were 0-471 when trailing by 13 plus points in the final 5 minutes of the game this season, and of course now they're 1-471. So Indiana, of course, didn't break the record, the specific records that they might have wanted to. But what was your outlook on the game? Of course, it was probably really nerve-wracking because I was on the field, really nerve-wracking. But how did you kind of take the emotion of the game and the roller coasters of not a great first half, second half, they kicked it off, they went up by 13 points, and then just the complete downfall in the last 4 to 5 minutes of the game?
Yeah, it was a really interesting Gator Bowl, like from start to finish. There were a lot of twists and turns that I'm sure Indiana fans, for people that have religiously follow the program, Indiana fans were not really surprised that this thing was a weird sort of roller coaster, unexpected type of game. And the funny thing is, having covered the football team all season, we really hadn't seen one of these classic Indiana fourth quarter losses all season. There were a couple of close calls, and there were a couple of crazy games, like the Michigan State game I can recall. The Penn State game was kind of crazy. The Purdue game was wild, but Indiana found a way to pull that one out of the fire. Gator Bowl, unfortunately, it was an all too familiar tune for Indiana football fans because it was right there. I mean, Indiana, it was funny. I texted one of my good friends in the early fourth quarter when it was 19-9. I said, look, I don't know how Indiana's going to blow this one, but I have no idea how it's going to happen, especially because I don't see it happening. Because it was 19-9, and Indiana's defense was playing well. The offense was moving the ball. The Indiana fans were into the game. I was listening to Don Fisher a little bit on the radio, and he was fired up and excited. And then, of course, Indiana, I mean, the instincts made sense because we had seen it before. IU had just a really rough final 5-6 minutes where the offense couldn't do much. The defense didn't deliver. The special teams really struggled. And that's why Indiana still hasn't won a bowl game since 1991. But the Hoosiers did get some good news yesterday with Whop Phillier's return to the program. So next year, they should absolutely be gunning for that bowl win again. But overall, I think, while it stings still for IU fans to not have that bowl win, both teams deserve credit. They played hard. It was 100% effort. Both teams were trying to win the game. There were a number of bowl games this year where that was not the case. There's a number of backups and second stringers and things like that. Indiana and Tennessee played a pretty quality sort of back and forth. It reminded me a little bit of the NFL wildcard games that we saw this past weekend where defense was a priority. Both teams were capitalizing on mistakes. At the end of the day, one team just made those key plays at the end of the game to win.
Or your quarterback got cheap shot. So, it's fine.
Wow. there are a few questionable calls as always, but I don't think that was the end all be all like some games might have been this season. But let's dive into a little bit of the specifics, not too much. We'll just kind of highlight the highlights, if you will. And of course, the first half was not much of anything, and I think it can all be sort of summed up by the lack of Peyton Ramsey scrambling. Because in the second half, when he started, when he was able to find some room to run and scramble and open up just both sides, the quote unquote like run per se, even though it wasn't a designed run, but also, and then it also helped open up the pass game to where Tennessee had to respect both the run and the pass and his scrambles. I think that was more of his bread and butter, and that kind of opened things up because the offensive line, if there's one position group that we're going to talk about most this offseason that needs the most work, and it's 100% the offensive line, and they definitely showed that against Tennessee because this game was definitely not on Ramsey's shoulders for the loss by the end of it. But of course, everyone has their specific opinions, but the end of the first half did not go as everyone might have thought. And I think I'll preface this by, and especially like Nathan talked about Wild Card Weekend, it is in-game situation. As a coach, it is a lot harder to game plan than we might think as we sit on the couch, because time and time again we think, oh, you should have called a timeout or not called a timeout here, done this and that. In the NFL, the best program in the entire world, they have I guess struggled, if you will, you are arguably struggled with some of these game and clock management. So of course at the end of the half, the Hoosiers had the chance to, with about 8 or so seconds left, they could have called a timeout or spiked the ball, and they didn't necessarily know what they were doing. I don't necessarily fault Tom Allen for not calling timeouts in specific spots, but I do fault him/the team for not knowing exactly what to do. Because when Peyton Ramsey went up to the line, he was looking back. He's like, "What do I do? What do I do? What do I do?" At that point, with 8 seconds left, you just call the timeout. There's not much left you're gonna do because they say at least 6 or 7 seconds for one play, at least at the bare minimum. They try and get 7 or 8 seconds. So when you're under that, call the timeout. You're not going to be able to run a play after that. But then it went into the end of the the game as well. And I thought the most troublesome game management thing was I wasn't necessarily, we'll talk about the onside kick later. We'll get into that and what your thoughts were later. But I thought since, of course, Indiana lost a couple timeouts at the beginning of the second half and into the second half, I thought those were a little more questionable compared to some of the other decisions, because then it did come back to bite Indiana in the butt later when they weren't able to stop the clock and they kind of had to keep running and rushing, and it might have turned into that turnover on downs by the end. So, Matt, what were your thoughts as we kind of talked about the game management and the game management this season? Do you think that's more on Tom Allen's shoulders, Kalen DeBoer's shoulders, or just a lack of where do you think it's falling from when us as the fans are questioning the game management at the very end of the season?
It's slightly depressing because I feel like it's like one of those things where it's like I'm sitting on my couch. I feel like I can do this, right? Like we were sitting in the press box and everybody goes, "They're not calling timeout. They're not calling timeout." They kind of just everybody looked around each other. "They're not calling timeout." Like, and all of us are like, wow, knowledgeable about football are not head coaches. Like, it's not our job to sit on the sidelines and coach. But like, even we were kind of like, that's a questionable decision. You can talk about the onside kick. We'll talk about it later, but also a questionable decision. Again, hindsight is 2020, as I always say on a lot of these decisions. And then it's been a problem all year, as you stated, and it hasn't really gotten better. But at the same time, Indiana is a growing program. Tom Allen is a growing head coach. Remember, this is his first head coaching job since he was a high school head coach. So as he grows and matures as a head coach and as he gets used to the job more, these things will become maybe ironed out more. We will occasionally have an issue. Tom Allen is not Nick Saban, okay? And Nick Saban is not going to be walking through the door of IU football. These are not guys that are like perfect. They know every situation. They've been through it a million times. Tom Allen's, as great of a head coach, and as much as I love him, he's not Nick Saban. But he's going to get better at it, and I think this season has taught him a lot of lessons about it. He owned up to the onside kick as his fault in the press conference, and I guarantee you that will never happen again to a Tom Allen coach team. He will have the hands team out there. If they get the onside kick, it's because they kicked a really good onside kick. That will not happen. He'll have the hands team out there from now on. And I think if he had to take back the last 8 seconds of the first half, he would absolutely call a timeout. And I think when they go over it in the offseason meetings and they're sitting there with the coaching staff, the new offensive coordinator, whoever they hire, they're going to go, okay, what are we going to do in this situation next year to improve this? And I think that's something that we're going to see as an improvement going into next year. It's just disappointing that it wasn't this year because you feel like, well, if we had maybe better time management, better timeout management in general for Tom Allen this year, like, well, maybe we could have, been 9 wins going on 10 in the bowl game, because then you look back at a couple of the really close games and go, well, if we need to use a timeout there, but you can do that almost every single season. I'm just saying that next season, I feel like this is going to be less of an issue. I still think he doesn't treat his timeouts like gold. You're supposed to treat your second half timeouts like you need all 3 of them going into the last 2 minutes. And we had 1 maybe going into the last 2 minutes when we really could have used a couple timeouts there just on that last drive, that last solid drive that we had to just, okay, chill out. Let's make sure we get the right play in and not be rushing things and, make sure, look at the defense, make sure, see what they're setting, because this is a really important down. But yeah, I expect it to improve. Do you agree, Nathan, at all with that?
Yeah, and as someone who I've watched every minute of every Indiana football game this season, and I think you guys have as well. My thought here is that Tom Allen has been more often than not, in fact, almost every time, prepared for situations like these. We can argue some timeout usage here and there, but all in all, Tom Allen's a guy who is prepared. He is pretty good with situational football, which is why that end of first half sequence was so frustrating watching it from an Indiana perspective, because indecisiveness is the worst thing that can happen there. You either call the immediate timeout or you spike it, take a second to do that, and you set up 2nd and goal from the 5-yard line or wherever that was to run a quick play. If it's incomplete, you kick the field goal. You've got to do one or the other with 8 seconds to go until halftime.
True.
And stunningly, this Indiana team with the redshirt junior quarterback and a number of experienced offensive linemen and an experienced coaching staff sat on the ball for 3 or 4 seconds, spiked it, and then that basically handcuffed them into kicking a field goal. As far as the second half goes, yeah, ideally Indiana would have had more than one timeout to go in that situation. It's always tough. You know, Tom Allen, I remember him saying during a press conference once, if he doesn't believe his team is prepared for a certain situation, if he doesn't believe his team is organized for a big 3rd down play, whether it's on offense or defense, he's going to use the timeout. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, if you have timeouts in your pocket at the end of the game, it doesn't mean anything. So that's his general philosophy, and we're not going to be able to change his mind on that. At the end of the day, had Indiana had another timeout or two, it would have helped their cause. But to me, guys, I think, Noah, you had kind of touched on how there was some questionable officiating throughout the game. I have no idea what happened on that Logan Justice 52-yard field goal at the end of the 4th quarter, because Indiana had about 2.5 minutes to go after Tennessee called timeout, and then magically the clock ran 20 seconds after Tennessee timeout. I don't know what happened. No one said anything. Very strange, but all in all, look, when your program is where it is right now, where it is competing with the better teams in the country, all of a sudden, each little thing gets magnified, whether it's timeouts, whether it's 2-point conversions, whether it's missed extra points, whether it's missed onside kicks. Every little mistake gets magnified, and you saw that against Tennessee.
So I had this one thought driving back from Jacksonville all the way up to Northern Virginia, which is a long time to think. And which, by the way, apparently the rest stops in eastern South Carolina were littered with really just gross and disgusting Tennessee fans. Like they were just jeering at me for wearing an IU shirt, just going to use the restroom at a rest stop.
I got home. I left the same day that you did. I drove home, and I'm in my hometown driving through, and what passes me but a caravan of Tennessee cars. And I'm like, I can't escape. I can't get away. I'm like 150 miles south, and I can't get away.
So I heard Tennessee fans at the most of real life Tennessee fans, of course, compared to Twitter, are much better compared to their internet counterparts. But apparently, you should only meet Tennessee fans at and or around a game, and not at rest stops or on Twitter. But anyway, in my thoughts on driving back, I had this one question that popped into my head, and I was like, well, they haven't had. Well, I think there's one of two things. One, of course, I think this is one of the bigger ones, is that just Tom Allen hasn't been in this situation very much, because when you're on the losing end of games and losing by multiple touchdowns, there's no need to clock manage anything because there's nothing to do there. But the other thought I had was, possibly, do you think, and now this 100% falls back on Tom Allen, he could have fixed things and taken over because he's the last line of defense. But Nathan, do you think, real quick, that this ended up being the clock management this season was a product of the only fault of Kalen DeBoer?
Wow. So, no, I'm sorry. So can you say your question again? I guess that was a little confusing to me.
Was this the one thing that Kalen DeBoer did wrong this season? Now, I'm not saying that actually this was Kalen DeBoer's job, but I'm saying, did Tom Allen shell this out to Kalen DeBoer, and was he not as prepared as he could have been?
That's interesting. Yeah, I guess kind of a behind-the-scenes look with DeBoer taking over at Fresno State starting in the fall. And maybe that's something Allen gave DeBoer the responsibility for. This is something that normally falls on the head coach. So whoever's responsible for clock management,
last line of defense, but
I do remember a couple of years ago, Andy Reid, the Chiefs head coach, gave Matt Nagy play calling duties for a playoff game sort of late in the season against Tennessee. And then they sort of switched responsibility there at halftime. It was a really strange setup. So I don't know what Indiana did there. I will say one thing about DeBoer. He took a while to figure out where to attack Tennessee during the Gator Bowl, because Indiana's offense was not struggling just because of pressure, if you ask me. At the end of the day, when Watt Fillier struggles to get 10 yards total in the game, that says to me, hey, we need to find a way to get our best playmaker the football. I understand Stevie Scott was a surprise absence, as well as Simon Stepaniak, a big-time offensive lineman who he's going to, as a graduate now, he's going to move on and try to make an NFL practice squad or a roster somewhere. But Scott and Stepaniak's absences hurt. I still was surprised Indiana did not find a more effective way to attack Tennessee's defense really until the third quarter.
Yeah, and especially because that offensive line has not those are not new schemes, those are not new players playing those combinations, and that's not a new defense quality defensive line that they have seen before. But let's move into the other hot topic of the onside kick, and even from the sideline where I didn't get to see as much details compared to obviously the big camera in the sky, but I wasn't as and Tom Allen really I think nailed what his thoughts were in the post-game press conference. I didn't necessarily have a problem with the outcome or the decision not to have the hands team on the field. Now, I will say it's always better safe than sorry, especially because I keep forgetting about this. I think the stupid rule of the kickoff, and if you fair catch it, even in play, that you get the ball on the 25-yard line. It's not just in the end zone in college. I forgot about that rule. There's always better safe than sorry. If you got one person back, everyone up in front, that's the last thing you can do, get the ball on the 25. But there was 4+ minutes left in the game, and Tennessee had all 3 timeouts. Any other situation, normally you'd kick the ball, defense, even a defense that hasn't been playing very well. Usually you trust the defense. Hey, I can get stops because the offense will almost every single time run 3 plays right up the middle just to get you to use your timeouts, and then you get the ball back. So, and also Tennessee did not come out in a very obvious onside kick situation, at least from my perspective. They still looked like it was still even players. It didn't necessarily look like they were going to go for the onside kick right away. And then of course it was a close onside kick. So I don't necessarily fault him for that. He looked at it, and like Matt said, I think that's a mistake he might not ever make again. But Nathan, did you understand, I guess, his logic? And of course, hindsight's always 20/20. You'd always, of course, now you'd be like, oh, he definitely should have done that. But you kind of understand his logic, or did you think even from when the commercials were coming on that you think he should have come out in an onside kick formation?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to have to pick that second option. I think at the end of the day, you've got to be ready for an onside in that situation. Look, if you have the hands team on the field, at that point, I think Tennessee kicks it deep, and then you play the clock management game. I have a feeling, Brent Samaglia, I believe, is Tennessee's kicker, who is responsible for the honestly perfect execution of that kick itself. He's an upperclassman, and I think Jeremy Pruitt, Tennessee's head coach, basically gave him an option. He basically said, look, if you like the numbers you have up front, and I'm just speculating here, but I have a feeling Pruitt told him, hey, if you like the numbers you see up front, give it a shot. Who knows what happens? Obviously, if Indiana crowds the 45-yard line 10 yards from the line of scrimmage, from the kickoff spot, Samaglia might loop it over. There are 2 things I do want to mention, however, that frustrate me a little bit more than the onside kick. So the first thing that bugs me, which happened just a couple possessions earlier, was Indiana electing to kick a field goal leading 19-9. So Indiana had a 19-9 10-point lead, and a 3rd and 15 pretty deep in Tennessee territory. Peyton Ramsey checked it down to Ronnie Walker, who picked up 9 yards, setting up a 4th and 6. And conventional wisdom at that point says, hey, you're up by 10, kick the field goal, push it up to a 13-point lead, see what happens. Indiana had a 4th and 6 at the Tennessee 12-yard line. At that point, my instinct immediately said, hey, your offense is pushing the ball down the field. And Tom Allen has actually cited this after games previously. He said, hey, look, going up from leading from 10 points to 13 points is not nearly as big of an advantage as 10 to 17. I would have taken a shot there on 4th down and tried to score. Now, if you kick the field goal, okay, 13-point lead, 22-9 with about 11 minutes to go, a long way to go. Okay, let's set that aside. The second issue I have that Indiana fans have seemed to dismiss a bit is what happened to Indiana's defense when they had that 13-point lead. Forget what happened on the touchdown after the onside kick. Tennessee was able to simply walk down the field on a 75-yard touchdown drive to cut it to a 1-score game. And Tennessee didn't even face a 3rd down until they got deep into Indiana territory. That was the possession that I thought in hindsight Indiana lost the Gator Bowl there. That's where the Hoosiers, whose defense played so well for 3.5 quarters, that's where I thought the game was lost. Because once it's a one-score game, now Tennessee's really feeling it. They've got their, they've got their confidence going. That 2-score defense where they sagged off previous, that to me is where Indiana lost the game.
Yep, they didn't keep aggressive and they missed tackles. And when you do both of those, you give up touchdowns every time.
Which both of those are completely fair. It's just hard for me to, since the defense was 100% the reason Indiana was in the game. It's really hard, even with that, and I 100% agree, Nathan, on 99.9% of the other days, the other games, I would put this on the defense. It's just hard for me to even say defense, come on now, even though they were the reason that Tennessee drove 4 times into the red zone /10, even inside 10 yards, and they only got 9 points out of 4 red zone trips in the first half. So yes, I agree. It's just 100% agree. It's just hard for me to necessarily just blame them for that specifically. And I like you said, the one moment I thought the one moment for me was the penalty. They were about to go off the field, and then penalty first down on the defense, and it was like, oh man, all right, this is where Indiana's probably going to end up losing the game. And then
and that's why it was frustrating, because the defense really had played an A+ game up to that point. I mean, they scored a pick 6 with Jamar Johnson. They had gotten sacks. They had gotten tackles on 3rd down to get off the field. And then it just, the scheme changed. And when the scheme changes, bad things happen, especially in a winner-take-all type of game like the Gator Bowl was.
Yep, exactly. So, and I think Matt kind of summed it up. The irony of this entire season was lost on the very last play, where Peyton Ramsey had a lack of throwing power to get the ball all the way out there to Nick Westbrook when he was wide open, which, again, 0% of this loss, well, not 0%, but pretty close to 0% of this loss goes on Peyton Ramsey in this entire season, because he saved the entire season. But Matt, I'll let you speak briefly so we can get to some basketball talk. We both mentioned and how this kind of really doesn't put a damper on the season overall. And of course, we'd all would have rather had 9 wins, tied the highest amount of wins that they had. But just a quick summary, Matt, of now that we're a few days after, how do you view this season?
An absolute win, and an absolute joy and pleasure to watch this football program grow. Disappointing a little bit that we didn't get to see more of Michael Penix, but I think Peyton Ramsey has now left his defining mark on this program. You just talked about Peyton, and this season is not this season without Peyton Ramsey. Jack Tuttle is highly anticipated as the backup to Mike Penix in the future, and Ramsey is the backup now to Mike Penix, but Ramsey, being the starting quarterback that he is, staying at the program, buying into love each other, and getting his shot and taking full advantage of it and winning 8 games, something we haven't done since the 90s. Congratulations, Peyton Ramsey. Great to watch. It's a young defense, and they had their struggles at the beginning of the year, and I ripped them at the beginning of the year, and I ripped the defensive coordinator at the beginning of the year, and they had their best game to end the season, and that's how you want to end the season. Is it disappointing that they let up 2 touchdowns in the last 7 minutes? Yes, to lose the game, but the offense didn't score either, so it's not totally on the defense. The offense had their worst game at the end of the season, losing our offensive coordinator, but most of the starters returned, and there's a little bit of a hole to fill on the offensive line with Stepanek. I feel like we'll have it filled, because if there's one thing that is good almost every single year for Indiana football, that is their offensive line play. And Bedford is coming back as a sophomore who was really good as a left tackle. And then you look up and down the roster and go, we finished the season without Stevie Scott. We had injury issues almost all up and down the roster, but Watt played in almost all the games, and he's coming back, and he's going to be my social media shout out in a minute when we talk about that. So overall, the season is a win. I thought the season was going to be a rebuilding year. I predicted at the beginning of the year that we'd win 5 games, but it'd be the best Indiana team since the 90s. And we actually pulled out in 3 or 4 games that I thought that we might lose. We pulled out a win. We went to Nebraska and won. And Nebraska is a football powerhouse, whether they play like it or not. They are. And they will be. They'll be forced to be reckoned with in a couple years in the West. But overall, the season was fantastic. Congrats to the staff and the football players, to the seniors. Thank you for coming to Indiana football and changing the program. And I cannot wait to watch the Hoosiers next year. And then we're going to be talking about basketball from here on out. So this is the last positive thing we have to say. Yay!
Exactly. Couldn't agree more. So let's move on to speaking of basketball. But before we get to basketball, Nathan, who won the week this past week in IU sports?
Yeah, we're gonna have one more positive thing here, Matt.
Okay, cool.
Maybe a couple. The women's basketball program continues to just,
of course,
take out a bit of fury and action against their opponents. They are not just winning games; they're winning games by double digits against some pretty good programs.
Yep.
In the last week, they went to Rutgers and won by 10. Rutgers is a pretty tough place to play as far as Big Ten basketball is concerned in the women's game.
True.
And then Illinois came to Assembly Hall and IU doubled them up. I mean, Indiana yesterday on Big Ten Network won the game 83-42 against the Illini. And Illinois, it was more lopsided than that. I mean, IU really sort of let the foot off the gas pedal at the end of that one. So Terry Moore and squad is doing great things. They matched their all-time program high number 12 ranking on Monday. Jalen Penn scored her 1,000th career point. So, she's a fun player to watch. Allie Patberg had a great game yesterday against Illinois. She's awesome as well. So the women's program keeps doing well. Also, the MLS released an interesting, Major League Soccer released a sort of a mock draft tweet earlier today, and Indiana's Jack Marr is projected to go number 1 overall. So the men's soccer program as well as the women's basketball team both doing great things right now.
Awesome. Yep. And we're not going to discuss this. This is just food for thought for you. But is the IU women's basketball team last year, and again, remember last year they were a team basically kind of budding and blooming, and then they made it a relative to the program an NCAA tournament run, something that basically did things that the program hadn't seen, and you saw just this budding and blooming program ready to explode. Is last year's women's basketball team football for this year going into next year?
Yes.
So food for thought as we go into our next part, and hopefully that's something to think about as we go into our next segment. But before we get to that, I just want to remind all of you listeners to subscribe, rate, and share the Hoosier Sound wherever you listen to podcasts. If you haven't before, share this with a friend. That's kind of how we like to grow our podcast. If you kind of like our content, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to us. Make sure you get all of those to wherever you listen to podcasts. But let's get into, I guess, more venting, if you will. And of course, Hoosier fans might not have expected a win this past Saturday in College Park, but I definitely think we expected a different game. I'll put it at that. But Indiana fell to, at the time, number 15 Maryland, 75-59, and of course the game was not as close as that 16-point margin of loss was. And Hoosier fans are really frustrated. I don't think we need to get into necessarily details of what happened during the game, this and that, yada yada yada. And we can kind of do just an overall broader picture. And now between between segment banter and between game chat that we have in our Slack channel for Indiana HQ, I've got the ideas of what Nathan and Matt have for just where this team is overall. So let's kick it off to I'll give it over to Matt first. And after the Maryland loss and going into Northwestern at the beginning of January with still most of Big Ten left to play, Matt, where are your thoughts on this team?
I have to separate my thoughts into two categories. My mom used to teach me to take my thoughts, because I used to have real bad ADD, and put them into boxes. So we're going to do that for this thought exercise. We're going to put into boxes. So the first box is we haven't lost a game I didn't think we were going to lose yet. At Wisconsin, probably a loss. Almost always is, if you look back historically in IU basketball. At Maryland, Maryland's a top 15, top 10 team on the road. In the Big Ten, you don't win road games. Ask Purdue what happened at Illinois. We lost at home to Arkansas, a team that shoots lights out. And as we have talked about on the podcast before, the pack line sometimes struggles to close out in time to 3-point shooters if you do it well enough. And Arkansas got 2 guys hot, and they went into Assembly Hall, and we let them beat us. That last statement is the second box, which is we're not playing great at all, and we're 11-3 box. It's the box that concerns me for the next couple games. Like, we have Northwestern tomorrow. I swear we better win that game, or otherwise my top is going to blow off.
We'll talk about that in a little bit.
That would get a lot of viewers.
That would be a great thumbnail. Then we have Ohio State on Saturday, who we might have a special guest, so that we might actually have a really good home crowd for that game. But anyways, that's besides the point. Ohio State starts a rough stretch for this Indiana program. And if we're going to play like we've played the last 6-7 games, we are going to go 0-5 or maybe even 0-6. And we might even see a run similar to last year's run where we win or lose. Sorry, not win. We lose 12 of the next 13. And if that happens again, I cannot see us having the same coach going into next year. And I will go out there on a limb and say that if another collapse like that happens this year in Big Ten play, Archie Miller will not be our head coach going into next year. And I like Archie, and I want Archie to succeed. I hope to the good Lord above Archie succeeds. And this is the third box, which is the panicking side in me. Our guards can't play at all. They look like they're overcoached. Our forwards looked cooked in the second half, and we always run away from our game plan, and it's annoying. So, to sum it all up, my thoughts on the current state of the Indiana basketball program is complete and utter chaos. Nathan.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna interject there, Nathan.
Sure.
We could have a 5 or 6 minute monologue each. I'm giving you a 90-second clock.
Ooh, okay.
Oh.
Now, one thing I will say is we can't at some point here we'll get to actual solutions rather than just talking about problems. Right? So that's going to be on the list.
But problems are so easy to talk about.
They're so easy to talk about, but we're going to talk about solutions in a little bit. I'll say this. To me, as I said on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, Indiana basketball changed me. They're in the last year, they've changed me. It's no longer just about wins and losses. I'm a firm believer now that there are certain things as good losses and a certain thing as bad wins. And really, looking back, it was the Wisconsin game that changed everything. For some reason, Indiana, and again, I understand Indiana played easier opponents at the start of the year. But Indiana was playing better at the start of the year, not just because of the teams they were playing. And that carried over into a game against a top 60 in KenPom right now, Louisiana Tech, and then a Florida State team that right now is ranked number 10 in the country. Yeah. Indiana was playing well. And then they went to Madison and got their butt kicked, and it completely has taken the wind out of their sails. And there's no need for that to happen. This is a very talented basketball team, having watched every second of every game to this point. The players themselves can play. It's now up to them and the coaching staff as well to maximize what their abilities are from here on out. Unfortunately, I don't have the confidence in saying that they're going to turn this around. If they do, these next 4 games are going to make a big difference, because after Northwestern, Ohio State, at Rutgers, and at Nebraska, the degree of difficulty gets cranked up about 100 degrees. And it's going to be an absolute gauntlet unlike you've never seen. And I'm not going to list out every single game. Y'all can look at the schedule. But it starts with the home game against Michigan State, and really until the last 2 home games to end the regular season. It's brutal. So the next 4 games will make a big difference in how, if it simply put, whether Indiana makes the tournament or misses it.
Yeah.
That was pretty good. You were 16 seconds over your 90-second clock. That was pretty good for because Nathan can definitely go on this topic for a while, and
We all can.
So I will sum up my thoughts on that part just by, and I could write multiple articles on the specific details. I just don't want to make this podcast completely long. But I'm just going to sum it up as the season's not over yet, and there are a lot of games left. And like Nathan said, this team has the talent, and Archie has Archie. It's not like Archie has just turned into a bad coach overnight. So I'm still gonna wait for the rest of the season to play out to see the specific reaction that I have. But of course, my thoughts are trending more towards Matt and Nathan than more of the positive. But so basically, so we talked about the problems. Now, basically, whose fault is it? And I think it's pretty fair to say that it's a little of both, because you've got Archie Miller that if for 2 seasons in a row at least, and of course this season is a much smaller segment than last season, and we'll have to see if they keep it up or if they can get out of it. But as of now, just currently, this wouldn't have happened 2 years if Archie's, and I think it's more of Archie's message just getting across to the players. Not everyone has specifically bought into it, specifically the upperclassmen. So Archie is trying to find different ways to get to different people, against specifically the upperclassmen. So I think there's different things that he could do, but I just want to play a small little game with you guys, and just because I think a lot of this is really on the specific players on the teams themselves, and I hope you guys can sort of kind of play along as well. So I'm going to give you the player's name, and just are they over exceeding expectations, kind of meeting expectations, or underperforming? And we'll start kind of guards and go down low. We'll start with an easy one. Armaan Franklin, exceeding, meeting, or below?
Exceeding.
Matt? Meeting. Oh, interesting. Al Durham.
Falling. Underneath.
Under.
What's the word? Yeah. not meeting. Failing.
Over, meeting, under.
D+.
Under, okay.
Devontae Green.
He was responsible for Florida State, so for that, I'm going to give him a meeting.
Under.
I agree with under. Rob Fennessy.
Under.
To be decided. He hasn't really.
As of now. Nope. As of now.
Well, then under, of course.
Under. Yep. As of now. Demezy Anderson.
Under.
Above.
Jerome Hunter. We'll throw him out. He with injuries and stuff. Trace Jackson Davis.
Exceeding. Above, yeah.
Justin Smith.
Under.
Yeah, strong under.
Race Thompson.
Under.
Meaning, I definitely think under for what he could have done. I even think Deron Davis can be thrown out too with that, but we'll still put him in. So Deron Davis.
Meeting.
Senior under.
Yeah, I agree. And then Joey Brunk.
Meeting.
The slim edge to meeting to under.
So
meeting.
My point is that there were only 2 players that we almost unanimously said are over exceeding expectations, and there was only 1 player that we kind of agreed that is meeting expectations. And that's my point, basically. The 2 players that were overachieving is the freshmen. The freshmen were overachieving. And again, those are the players that Archie Miller recruited himself to come in and play and is buying into his system and what he wants to do. Then you've got Joey Brunk, another guy he's sort of kind of recruited that's meeting expectation. And I don't think all of that's on his back right now. I think he could be over exceeding expectations if the play was better around him. So that being
giving him the ball.
Exactly. So that being said, it's basically on everyone else that is just not playing very well whatsoever. And I don't think all of that extends to Archie Miller himself, because at some point it was really funny in the press conference when they asked him about basically the offensive woes in his first answer, and then he paused. I thought that was the only thing he was going to give, and he was going to give a Bill Belichick statement, was just like, the ball needs to go in the basket. Was the only why shots weren't falling. And he paused and he was like, I'm going to give a response after that. But I thought that was hilarious because he was so frustrated, and he had a point. The first half shot selection in Maryland was pitiful. The first 10 minutes of the game, IU had not shot a single 3-pointer. At that point, Indiana was up 5. I don't think it's any coincidence whatsoever that the first 3-pointer was shot at 9:47, I think almost exactly, and then Indiana went 1 for 7, and they were down by 8 at the halftime. They continued to shoot the 3-pointer basically, and they ended up losing by technically 16, but really more 20 to 30 points. I don't think that's any coincidence whatsoever. Second half, though, especially when they were in their down 3-point comeback, I don't think it was the shot selection. I think they turned that around. The shots just were not falling whatsoever. Armand Franklin had wide open shots and kind of and it wasn't like it was a weird shot either. They just weren't falling. So I think to some extent, Archie Miller is correct with that. There's not much you can do when literally the ball won't go in the hoop and you've got your proverbial, the lid is on the basket almost exactly. So I don't think we can dwell on this too much just because if we had answers, we would already be the coach of Indiana already right now. Archie Miller doesn't have the answers. The players don't have the answers. No one has the answers. All it is speculation. And I think as we get into our next and final segments of the show is basically how they can turn it around and what they need. And I think personally, and I'm going to give it one word. I'll ask all of you of what they need to fix this. And I'm going to say confidence. Matt, what's your one word to fix the team?
Lineups.
Ooh. Okay, Nathan.
Well, it's one word, right? Upperclassmen.
One word. Sure.
Well,
yeah, that's one
yeah.
word. So
that's one.
Six upperclassmen.
Big word.
as we pause there and tease into the next segment, look at me doing hosting and teasing into the next segment. We're going to pause there and do switch it over to Matt with our social media shout out before we get into what those one words can do for the Indiana basketball team this week.
Sure. So social media shout out for the week, since there wasn't a lot of, great news this week in the world of IU sports other than the women's basketball team. WAP decided that he's coming back. Our superstar wide receiver, the guy that had maybe 10 yards in the Tennessee game. That guy is coming back for his senior season and will be playing in the Cream and Crimson and will be matched up with his bestie, Michael Penix, starting. So if you want to follow WAP, WAP's Twitter is at Superstar WAP. Really easy. So, he's our superstar wide receiver and he has a superstar Twitter handle. So.
Yep, exactly. And you talked about the women's basketball team being bright side. Wrestling actually had a pretty good bright side. They had their best finish to a series of championships they've done since 2013. So the wrestling program is slowly turning around. They're kind of like volleyball. They're usually at the bottom, but right now it seems like they have a coach that can kind of lead them out of the hole. But let's get into our next part and talking about the two opponents that Indiana has this week. Now, as most of you will be listening to this on Wednesday, tonight will be the game against Northwestern. As of now, obviously, tomorrow, but Wednesday, January 8th at 7:00 p.m. on BTN. And I think, then they've got at currently, which now they just lost to Maryland. Keep that in mind. Ohio State just went to College Park and lost to Maryland by 12. Which will be still at the time, number 11 Ohio State Indiana will play them on Saturday, the 11th at 12 o'clock. Another stupid noon game on Fox, which the time of game is not something that is an excuse, but I think it's, I don't know, just take that into account. It doesn't help with the last game against Saturday against Maryland and then another game on Saturday being noon. Anyway, I think all of those three words that we gave, mine was confidence, Matt was lineups, and Nathan's was upperclassmen. All of those can start, and they will have to. I think this is going to I think confidence is the biggest one that can be shown tonight is against Northwestern. You've got a Northwestern team that is. Let's not sugarcoat it. They're
awful.
They're pretty bad, and they right now they have a losing record. They're at the bottom of the Big Ten. And to top it all off, they just had 3 really bad injuries. So not only are they not performing, but they had a lot of injuries. And I was thinking, I guess to be happy with the result tomorrow is, and I was like, I could see an 8-9 point game win, just get a W, get right back on track. But at this point, I think they need to get at least a double-digit win, and I think only for the reason of confidence. They need to, even if it's against another opponent, even if they win by 20 or 30, I'm still going to pull the brakes back, but I'm still going to say, hey, they remembered how the ball goes in the basket. They remembered how to pass the ball. They remembered how to rebound and play defense, even if it was a team that was really low. Because remember, at the beginning of the season, the offense was the talk of the entire team. They were scoring 80, 90 points in the first 5 or 6 games. And then same thing with Florida State. Even though it was obviously against lower opponents, that means you see it's physically there. It's just obvious. And I don't think the defense is that good to where it goes from 90 to 100 points all the way down to basically below 50 points. I don't think the defense that they're facing is that good. So I'm going to say confidence is the biggest thing with Northwestern, because if they can get the confidence, Ohio State is 100% now a beatable team going at home on Saturday. And like Nathan said, there's that 4-game stretch that they're really going to need to try and figure something out before they go into a gauntlet. So that's not necessarily a specific way to segue into. I'll give the floor to Matt a little bit, maybe touch on some of the things with Northwestern, but then maybe Matt, some of the things you kind of want to see or you might need to see Indiana do. We'll start with Northwestern specifically because I think at this point it doesn't do much to look into the future, and they just need to take it game by game. So Matt.
Yeah, I mean, of course, taking it game by game is, what you do in basketball, right? You change your matchups. You do that in football. You do that in every sport, right? You got to scout the team, got to make sure. But I honestly think the problems with this team is the lineups we're playing. And God bless Justin Smith. He's the most frustrating player on the team, probably, outside of Devontae. And when he plays well, it's great. And he shows you games where he plays well. But I seriously don't think he's playing well because I don't think he's put in a position to succeed right now in the way we're playing them. He is the third forward in a lineup with 3 forwards in it. He cannot be that stretch forward. He's just not. That's not who he is. He's a rim runner. He's a guy that attacks the basket. You're not asking him to take spot up 3-pointers. Please don't take spot up 3-pointers. You're asking him to attack the hoop. And we're not putting him in a great position when you have Trace and Joey on the court at the same time. And he has no space to work with. So I would like to see us move away from the 2 bigs lineup. I know Archie was like, yeah, we're going to go back to old school basketball. We're going to play that way this year. And we're all like, great, that sounds awesome in theory, but it doesn't work. Because what do defenses do? They do what Nebraska did to us. They do what the last 7 teams have done to us, which is literally pack the paint. Everybody just don't let them get the post entry in. Deny, 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 deny. And make them shoot 3-pointers over you and make them take off the dribble 3-pointers where they're dribbling it for 20 minutes before they shoot a stupid 3, Devontae. And so the lineup needs to change. We need to inject people who are a threat from 3 or a threat to space the floor at least. And what I mean by that is somebody along the lines of Jerome, who hopefully he comes back and gets more confidence. Like Noah said, so confidence is a part of this as well. Or a 3-guard lineup, which I've been talking about forever, but hopefully Rob Finney is feeling better come this Northwestern game. But we need to fix the lineups. You cannot have a majority of the game with a 2 bigs lineup. I don't mind the 2 bigs lineup to end the game. I don't mind it to start the game. But I don't want it to be the majority of the game in the 2 bigs lineup. It doesn't work. It's not modern basketball. Teams can easily plan against it, and we really don't have that great of a counter for it if they're denying the ball. You have to change the lineups.
Are you talking about basically Trace and then Joey / Duran as that counts as a 2 big lineup? Is that what you're considering? Okay.
If it Trace on the floor with one of Joey and Duran,
or Race. So Matt, does it change anything for you? Because Maryland, I think, was definitely the game because you talked about lineups. Archie had 23 unique lineups, and I haven't looked in the specifics of all of the games this season, but I think it's really fair to say, besides the garbage game meant things at the beginning of the year where all the walk-ons play, I think it's fair to say that was Maryland was probably the game that saw the most different lineups, and still obviously nothing worked. So does that change your opinion with that?
Absolutely not. I don't think anybody's playing really well in the Maryland game. I think their confidence was shot, as you said, and then we resorted to not sticking with the game plan. And when all of that happens, it doesn't matter what lineup you put on the floor, you're just going to lose. I
can butt in on this real quick because I have an Excel spreadsheet full of fun data and information. So everyone's going to have to bear with me here. It's going to be about 30 seconds of numbers. So here's the deal. When Justin Smith has has 2 bigs on the floor with him, Indiana in 248 minutes, he's plus 38. All right. So that's your Jackson Davis, Brunk, and Smith, or Jackson Davis, Duran Davis, and Justice. So 248 minutes, he's plus 38. When Justin Smith is the 4, so basically one other big, he's played fewer minutes, 170, but he's plus 55. So the numbers go up. His effectiveness goes up. Indiana's effectiveness as a whole goes up when there's just one other big on the floor. Similarly, Trace Jackson Davis is getting affected by this as well, because when he's the 4 on the floor, he's played 224 minutes. He's plus 15. So that means there's Joey Brunk on the floor as well, or Deron Davis. When Trace Jackson Davis is the only big man, when he's the only center, he's played 166 minutes and he's plus 66. So basically, the data backs up what Matt's asking for, where he's saying, hey, make Justin Smith basically the 4, make Trace Jackson Davis or Joey Brunk the 5, and mix and match your guards in there. But of course, the guards need to play well in order for this to all work out.
Absolutely, and guard play has been woeful.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest factor of all of this was what I was going to say. This is nothing against Joey or Deron, even if they were playing at the peak. I think it's more just that they've had to play because the guards have not been able to play. And I mean that obviously figuratively, because they physically can play. They just haven't shown that they can play. Because I think Rob is back from the injury physically. He's just not there back from the injury, if that makes sense. But yeah, so
Mental.
Nathan, do you have anything else to add basically with what you're seeing, or is there anything, one or two things specifically you want to see in the Northwestern game that might kind of, hopefully at least for Indiana fans, catapult it into some better play? Maybe not wins, but just better basketball on the court.
From, looking at it specifically from a Northwestern standpoint for Wednesday, they're really banged up. I mean, you might look at Ken Palm and say, hey, they're around 100th in the country. They're a lot worse than that, simply because they're so short-handed.
I feel bad for them honestly, at that point.
Yeah, they had a pretty game effort at Minnesota on Sunday, but I have a hard time seeing that carrying over. Of course, Indiana fans would like to think their team is better than the Golden Gophers as it is. So what I want to see on Wednesday, because again, like I said, this sets up a stretch of 4 winnable games against weaker opponents. Of course, you've got Ohio State coming, but they're coming to Assembly Hall. I want to see Indiana play with some attitude, play with some swagger, play, you're playing basketball. It's a fun game. I want to see Justin Smith dunking on guys. I want to see Trace Jackson Davis and Devontae Green chest bump. I want to see sort of an uplifted, fired up spirit in the Hoosiers on Wednesday night, because only, that kind of thing, whether Indiana wins by 5 points or 10 points or 50 points, that sort of thing really does carry over. And I just can't help but notice in a lot of the recent games, Indiana starts out confident, they start out fine, and then something happens, the opposing team starts building some momentum and starts getting a run, and then just their body language just deflates, and there's not much communication. That's something Archie Miller has talked about time and time again. You've got to play 40 minutes of confident, spirited, excited basketball, not just against Northwestern, but you've got to do it against every team going forward if the NCAA tournament is part of your long-term plan.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I think basically the first thing for Northwestern, it's kind of back to just basics, not necessarily specifics. I think it's going to be basically a combination of Nathan's answer and my answer, because whichever one comes first, chicken or egg kind of thing, the fire / confidence is going to, I think that's the first thing, because then I think that also breeds into better play, which we'll get into Matt's comment with better guard play, and then down to better lineups. Yeah,
2 guys I want to mention, though, specifically for Northwestern, if we're going to talk about that. Miller Kopp, he's a solid guard. He's a sharpshooter. He's a guy that has potential to score 20, 25 points, especially with all these injuries that Northwestern has. The other guy I do want to talk about, and we've got a full-scale preview of Northwestern over on Indiana HQ. I would highly recommend reading that at some point.
And we'll have for Ohio State as well for Saturday when it gets
there. Yeah, I mean, every game the rest of the way, going into March deep, hopefully. Yeah, we'll see. So full-scale preview, definitely worth your time over the next 21 and a half hours. So the other guy to keep an eye out for, who's got an interesting story as well, is Pat Spencer, who's a guard on Northwestern. This dude, he was a 4-year All-American for lacrosse at Loyola, Maryland. It's never heard of. He won the Tewaaraton Award, which is given to the most outstanding player in that sport collegiately. It's lacrosse's equivalent of the Heisman Trophy. And instead of playing lacrosse professionally, he said, I can play basketball, because why not? Wow. Big Ten's not that bad. So he transferred to Northwestern. Sure, he's getting a good education as well. But he's no slouch. I mean, that's the one thing that stands out. The dude's averaging double digits points per game. He's athletic. He gets rebounds. He put up 22 against Minnesota on Sunday. He's capable of shooting the three. So Kopp and Spencer are the two guys to keep an eye out for. Kopp is number 10 and Spencer is number 12.
Perfect. And he did not do professional lacrosse because professional lacrosse players have to have two jobs because they can't make a living off of it. That's how, if you probably did, you might not have even known that the professional lacrosse existed, especially if you're a hardcore Midwesterner. But double-digit win, confidence, fire, breeding hopefully some better basketball play so that Indiana can have at least a better performance against Ohio State, because if they can get a 100% must win against Northwestern, but if they can get that and get the confidence to just get back into it and beat a beatable Ohio State team, I think the podcast next Tuesday is going to be very different. So hopefully we'll have to see, because there's a lot of combinations that can happen from between now and next Tuesday. So good luck to the guys, obviously tonight/tomorrow. Hopefully that things are getting fixed in whatever the best way possible. But that's going to wrap it up for our 123rd episode of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and especially thank you to that live audience for coming out and venting with us on this not so cheery episode. But we'll be back next Monday for another edition of the Hoosier Sound Off. News and updates, Twitter. So if we ever have any different podcast timing or how we're going to release it, like this past few weeks, subscribe there, follow us, Hoosier Sound, Indiana HQ. Most importantly, if you enjoy our show, iTunes, Facebook, you can leave us a review there if you'd like to. Tell a friend, share our links. Your support is really how we grow this podcast, so we can reach all of those passionate IU fans such as yourself. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.